Alright, so I've finally got into the end game of Path of Exile 2, and I feel pretty confident I have a better idea of what kind of game this is and what I've learned in my time playing Path of Exile 2. If you see my previous videos, you know how I talk about how I had this aha moment where I finally figured out, discovered, for lack of better terms, what I needed to do to play the game a little bit better. And there are some things that I feel would be important to note for those who may or may not have experienced the game quite yet, or maybe my understanding of what has happened after putting in about 50 hours. I've put in a little bit over 50 hours of time in on this game, and yeah, there's a lot, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing that I like to address, and the first thing that I want to bring up, because I feel like it's a misnomer, is that this game is too hardcore. I don't believe that the game is hardcore. I really, really don't. Well, yes, you can take it to hardcore levels of difficulty, extremeness, however you wish to call it. That could be said for every other game out there. I mean, just look at like StarCraft 2. You could easily play that game casually, or I should say with, you know, a little bit of focus and have fun. It's really subjective to depending on who the person is. Whenever there is the idea of hardcore is that you need to have, the joke from Path of Exile 1 is like a PhD in the game to understand what skills work, what gems work, what passive points work, all these different factors that go into it to make this complex puzzle that is your character. I don't feel that here in Path of Exile 2. Currently, again, it's early access, so we only have limited tools at our disposal. It doesn't feel like you need to have this utmost mastery on the game to actually do well. And I mean that in the best way possible, because when I look at the difference between a hardcore player and a casual player I view more so as someone who just wants to be able to turn their mind off, you know, just log in for a couple of hours, not think about anything and do this, play this game, whatever you're playing, and really not have to try. That is what I view as a casual player. Someone who just wants to have that dissociation away. Perfectly understandable. That's how I view casuals. I don't view a casual as someone who only has, you know, like someone like me who only has like 2 to 3 hours of extra playtime during the week to sit down and enjoy the game. Now, that's by no means saying that I'm a master of the game. However, I find myself thinking and viewing the game differently as I am not playing it. As I'm not playing it, I'm reading up on guides, I'm watching other content creators who do this game more often than I do to have a better understanding and also be like, oh, maybe I should try that on my character, or maybe, you know, I'll move some things around and see how that works. I view myself as someone who goes into the game and is able to just log in and play and not have to worry about anything, not have to really think too much about it, but I'm still paying attention. And I think that's something with Path of Exile 2, really what it does very well is that you don't have to be a hardcore player, but you still have to pay attention. You can't just be this auto brain turn off, you know, kind of casual player. I mean, there are some abilities and some builds that really have, you know, crazy capabilities, and I'm sure that they're out there, but I feel for the average player, most of them are going to go through the game and learn how to play the game as they are leveling up and jumping into the game, almost like this self-discovery. And as you are going through, you don't have to have this, you know, ridiculously high game knowledge to have fun. You're able to figure things out as you go, and you don't have to put too much effort into it for you to get to a decent understanding of the game. Now, I even bring up like my thoughts of mapping. Currently, I'm, you know, mapping around like tier 4 or 5. I've only put about, you know, 2 hours worth of mapping time in since I've been at max level or beat the main campaign. And even in that, like, it's not that I can't just turn my brain off. I still have to focus. There's a certain level of autonomy that is being applied, but also a certain level of focus. And I feel like that's the juxtapose between what is thought of for Path of Exile 2 versus kind of how it truly is. It definitely can be taken to hardcore levels, and you'll see it from other content creators, you know, such as Zizarin, Rax, you know, Wujito, DM, things like that, or the content creators who have a lot of time in the game and have played ARPGs almost exclusively. They have that experience there, and they are essentially forging the way forward. Most players, what I would believe most players, don't have that amount of time to sit down and devote to the game. So it is good to know that there are the hardcore capabilities of the game, but there's also more relaxed approaches where you'll be able to go on your own. You probably won't be able to be mindless and be able to just press one button delete. I know that there's builds out there like that, so before you comment, oh, they're out there, I know, I'm aware. But I feel like the average player isn't going to experience that. And that's something that I had to pick up, is that I didn't need to have this hardcore mentality for me to enjoy the game, but also do well. It's really just about messing around and trying out what works and figuring it out on your own. It's a lot of self-discovery. Another kind of big point that I realized, and I'm sure if you followed along with any of the Path of Exile 2 news or information recently, you would know that a lot of what happens in this game, as far as like gear and upgrading and specifically crafting, I talk about crafting, it's kind of random. It's kind of just luck of the draw, chance, what have you. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. So if you're coming into this game thinking that it's going to be fully fleshed out, that I can make my exact gear the way that I want, you're kind of up to the RNG gods, really. Now, in contrast with like Path of Exile 1, where you had the crafting and you could choose the specific modifier that you wanted, the prefix or the suffix, you could add those in there and go from there. Here in Path of Exile 2, currently, it's just kind of like good luck. You roll the dice every time that you use one of your orbs, whether it be, you know, a Regal Orb, a Chaos Orb, you know, what have you, whatever you're using. I mean, Val Orbs are fun. But the idea that I had to get over, or at least what I had to learn very, very quickly, was that as I'm getting my gear, I have to look at what has the best base stats. And I think that was always my approach. Like, if I have a blue piece of gear that already has, you know, a couple of good modifiers on it, and it's like the expert level, something like that, okay, I can work with that. Let's try to roll it into something that I will be better suited for me, better than what I have right now. And I think that's kind of the idea that they are looking at right now. Because again, let's be honest, early access, we're kind of like beta testers. They're just seeing what works based off of what we've been able to do. Now, as such, as these quote-unquote beta testers, I think the reason that they haven't added, you know, the perfected crafting bench, which I definitely believe that they will put in eventually, what they're doing right now is to see the differences of the percentage drop, the percentage chances. They're trying to balance those out to be, we'll say, more reasonable long-term. I don't think that they are trying to necessarily gatekeep people from, you know, picking out what works best for them just so that you can absolutely have a mind-crushing build that's going to destroy everything because you have this one new piece of gear, like this new weapon, Quarterstaff, that has X amount of increased lightning damage for me. And like, that would be something really, really good. I don't think that they're doing that right now because they want to kind of hammer out all their finer details on the back end. Now, I could be wrong on that, and if you guys know something better than I do, please comment, let me know. I feel like that's something that I had to realize that, again, yes, the way that you're getting gear and the way that you're kind of advancing your character is a bit of chance. It's actually quite a bit of chance right now. RNG is kind of leading the way, but that doesn't mean that the game isn't fun. It just means that you have less control, which I feel like that's something I had to learn. I had to kind of like untrain myself from kind of like what I learned from Path of Exile 1. Another important thing that I learned in this game, and I guess I shouldn't have thought otherwise because I was there for one of the earlier playtests. I went out to LA and got to do all this, is the emphasis on combination, combining skills together for greater effect. I knew that it would be an important part into the game, but I don't think I realized how important. So say, for example, I use off the basis of my monk. So currently I'm a Tempest Flurry monk. I use the charge staff ability in conjunction with Tempest Flurry to essentially generate power charges, electrocute enemies at a distance, and then I also have Herald of Thunder, which every time that I'm like shocking enemies, they're getting hit with lightning bolts. It's all over the place. It's great. It's a lot of fun. It's very, very fast. I didn't realize how important those combinations would be as I was going through the main campaign, and that's something that I would impart into you if you are watching and you haven't played the game thus far, is that joining skills together work dramatically better than individually on their own. So one of the main abilities for the monk is the Tempest Bell. The bell is like arguably included in every single build because it's just that strong. It's like this double area of effect transfer kind of attack, and it works really, really great. You can set it up so that it builds up stuns very, very quickly. So immediately, bam, you know, the boss already is stunned and they're completely go. It's great for wave clearing. It's great for all these other things. And I would put down the bell, and before Act 3, which I've made a video talking about my aha moment, before I hit Act 3, I was using Quarterstaff just the basic attack as my main damage. I didn't use Tempest Flurry, I didn't use, Ice Strike, I didn't use anything. I was just sitting there wailing with the staff. And as I was going through and I was hitting the Tempest Bell, it did all right, it worked. But then I used it in conjunction with like the Tempest Flurry. It was just this rapid fire Gatling gun of attacks. And then using the charge staff in conjunction with that is shooting out all these lasers that go all over the place. And it was so like cool to see that this was an implementation. And it only makes me more excited to try out the other classes and the other different capabilities that they have to see what cool effects there are. Like I've seen the warrior can use like slam abilities to cause these echoing these echo shockwaves, and that's one that I'm like, oh, that'd be really cool to set up that kind of build, and bam, you shockwave and the whole screen clears and then everything explodes. Like that looks like fun. One of the ones that they talked about was like the ranger using like a poison gas type ability and then lighting it on fire with flames, and it just causes this massive explosion of fire and poison. Like those kind of things are really, really cool. And I guess I didn't realize how important those combinations would be as I was playing the game up until I got into a specific moment. Now, again, if you're like me and you have to go in kind of blind and understand what's happening as you are approaching the game, on your own terms, that's how I approach games. That's how I learn video games. And I think there's quite a few people who probably do the same thing as me. It does take some time for you to get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, I've been doing everything wrong. And I guess that was kind of like what I learned, is that the combinations in this game are key to how well you do in the game, in the end game, and even against like the campaign bosses. Now, that being said, again, it's still early access and we only have so many tools at our disposal. So yes, combining them, of course, is going to be our best suit of survival. But I can imagine by the time that we get to like a 1.0 release, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is sometime later this year, maybe, I don't quote me on that. I heard talks of that. But once we actually get to the 1.0 release and we have all the different classes available, we have all the different weapons, we have more skill gems, it's only going to get wilder, more wild, with all the different combinations that we can do. So make sure if you're going through this is something that I learned, is to like pay attention to the combinations. One of the big things that I had to unlearn from myself, and this is something more of an affect of what I did during my first Path of Exile 1 playthrough, where I played as a shield block Templar that was essentially using, Righteous Shield that was echoing out every time I blocked an attack, which, by the way, that took me, it was like a Thorns Templar, it took me all the way to endgame. And then I got to a point where it was just, I hit a wall. I couldn't do any more. One of the big things that I learned was being more liberal with how often I change my passive points and abilities. Testing different things to see how they work, because it's a lot easier. Because you don't necessarily need to have the specific currency of the Orb of Regret. I had to kind of like learn when I should apply these different passive points and go and refund them to see how well they work. I can't tell you how many times I balanced back and forth going from a critical hit to going over to chaos damage. I really have tried to make Chaos Monk, Alkalite of Chayula work, and I haven't figured it out. I don't think I've gotten the right weapon, but I think I can. I think I can work on that one. But the idea is that I was able to go back and forth and change all these different things about my build and all of my capabilities, in the idea that I was going to eventually figure out the path that works best for me. Currently, I'm hammering out some more attack speed onto my abilities, and I think it's like Falcon Assault or something like that, where I get like a percentage of attack speed based off of every 15 dexterity that I have, where I have like over 100. So it's like, no, that could be like nearly like 6-7% increased attack speed, which is going to do crazy numbers for my damage. And it's like things like that where I've been able to move things around of what works and what doesn't work and really flesh that out. And I had to get over that mindset that, I don't need to have a currency. Don't be so rigid with your playstyle that you don't test things out and try things out. And I think that's what's fun. It's like, and again, as I mentioned earlier in this video, is that we're kind of like beta testers. So why not, test and see what works best for you? Using the gold, of course, there is a limited cap. However, it's far cheaper to just use the gold rather than the need to have a specific currency, So I will stress that to you. I will impart that to you. Is just like, be liberal, go out, try these different things. That's what I had to learn. And it worked out well. I mean, I'm doing fairly well in endgame. I'm progressing pretty quickly in my regard, what limited knowledge I have. And lastly, I think the biggest thing that I had to learn, especially going through this game, is that I had to take my time. Because it's something that I've realized as I've played video games more and more, especially big games like this, or more memorable games, is that you only ever really get the first playthrough once. You only ever get to enjoy that game for the very first time, you know, through its first playthrough once. So, you know, there is no inherent rush. It's not like we're on a season quite yet. It's not like we're doing anything along those lines. So I would always just stress to players and gamers, anyone who's, you know, not played this game or is trying to rush through because, oh, we got to get to end game. There's so much that goes on just even in the leveling process. And I found that it is more important that I understand it on a step-by-step basis. It's like getting to endgame and following, say, for example, like a complete build and doing all that. Yeah, you may need to use a build guide. You may need to follow along someone else's footsteps to make things work if you don't necessarily really want to put the time into understanding your character. But I find that it is so much more enjoyable and more memorable if you have that experience of working through it on your own, understanding your build, understanding what gear works, understanding how these different features in the game apply, just at your own pace, because I feel like most people are more of that kind of like kinesthetic learner. I learn by doing and seeing what's in front of me rather than, you know, just following something online. Having said that, of course, if you are not that type, maybe that's just something a little bit personal to me. I'm very much that way. I need to get my hands dirty to understand what's going on. I know that there's players out there who don't like that, who want to have it set up for you, and that's good for you. I mean, to each their own. I found more value in understanding all the processes of the game and the skills and the gems and the combinations, all that on my own. So that is my last little bit of advice, something that I learned from this game. Now, I have also talked about how this game has destroyed me, and I've since kind of like calmed myself down from all of its destroying capabilities. And if you want to see why it was destroying me, you can click this video here. Aside from that, stay caffeinated, folks.